consider the diversity of southern Africa's climate, its landform and its natural vegetation, and the range of natural habitats that the ever-changing landscape encompasses, it's hardly surprising that this part of the African continent is one of the richest bird regions in the world. There are birds in the mountains and birds at the coast, forest birds, and surprisingly enough, desert birds. There are grassland birds and wetland birds, town birds and garden birds. Altogether, there are nearly 900 different species of birds to be found in southern Africa. That is about 1/10 of the almost 9,000 species that are found throughout the world. Now, in order to deal with the diversity of birds, scientists have classified them into different groups. As a collective whole, birds, which are vertebrate animals and the only animals that possess feathers, fall into one main group or class known as aves, which is the Latin word for birds. Aves has then been divided into 29 groups called orders, the grouping being determined mainly by anatomical similarities. These orders have, in turn, been further subdivided into families. Let us take, for example, order Passeriformes, which is the largest of all the orders. Because in this group, there's so many different species of birds that are anatomically similar, the order has been subdivided into no less than 65 families. For example, all the different species of weaver birds have been grouped in one family, all the sunbirds in another family, and so on. Now, of the 29 orders, 26 are found in southern Africa. And in this program, we're going to present these to you and introduce you to some of the families that are found within each order. In presenting the orders, we will follow the same sequence as that used in the authoritative bird books of the region, beginning with those birds that are believed to be somewhat primitive. As we proceed from one order to another, the birds become progressively more advanced because of physical adaptations that have occurred. Perhaps it should be pointed out, however, that bird classification is not rigid, and that recent research has in fact suggested large changes to the scheme as it exists today. Order Struthioniformes is one of the most primitive orders of birds, and it is in this order that we find the family of ostriches, birds that come closest to resembling Archaeopteryx, the first birds known to have existed 140 million years ago. Ostriches are the largest of all living birds. They lay the largest eggs, and are also the only birds in the world that have just 2 toes instead of the usual 4. As their size suggests, they are flightless birds. But this apparent disadvantage is more than made up for by the fact that their long and powerful legs enable them to run fast. In southern Africa, ostriches are found in isolated pockets in many parts of the country, usually in the more arid regions. Their diet consists of insects, small reptiles and rodents, as well as fruit, plants and seeds, which means that they are what we call omnivorous birds, eating both plant and animal matter. Order Spheniciformes is an order of birds that bears little resemblance to any other. In it, we find just one family, the penguins, whose scientific name is derived from the Greek word sphenokos, which means a small wedge. This refers to the penguin's wedge-shaped flippers, which are its most outstanding characteristic. These flippers, which are stiff and move only at the shoulder, are useless for flying, yet marvelous for swimming. Penguins are in fact believed to be the most truly marine of all birds, and are so at home in the water that it's hard to equate them with the birds we are accustomed to seeing on land. When they do emerge from the water, which is mainly to breed and to molt, they present a clumsy picture. Since their legs are so short, and set so far back on their bodies, they're forced to stand upright and move about either by hopping or waddling. The jackass penguin, which was so named because of its donkey-like bray, is Southern Africa's only resident penguin. This very contented colony has taken up residence at Betty's Bay. Another group of birds whose legs are placed far back on their bodies have been placed in order Podicipediformes, which means literally the rump-footed. In this order, we find duck-like birds, commonly known as grebes. The little grebe or dabchick being the most widely distributed species in the region. They lead a totally aquatic lifestyle and are to be found on freshwater lakes or quiet streams and pools. But they're often shy, and you can't get too close to them. Now, although from a distance grebes are often mistaken for small ducks, there are several features about them that make them different and distinctive. A grebe's bill, for example, is more slender and pointed than a duck's, and its plumage tends to be thicker, softer, and more lustrous. Another very important difference is to be seen in foot structure. Whereas a duck's foot is fully webbed, a grebe's toes are unconnected, and each toe is fringed with a stiff, horny flap. A grebe also lacks the functional tail that a duck has to help it steer through the water. Instead, it relies on its feet. Yet, as a swimmer, it completely outclasses the duck and is amazingly quick and agile in the water. Order Procellariformes is another order of aquatic birds, but this time is made up of 3 families of seabirds that you're not likely to come across unless you're a regular sea traveler or deep-sea fisherman. Placed in this order are the different species of albatross. The petrels and shearwaters, and the swallow-like storm petrels, birds that are collectively known as tubernaires or tube noses because their nostrils extend onto their beaks in short tubes. The albatross has 2 of these nostril tubes, a small one on either side of its bill, whereas the petrel has 1 which runs along the top of its bill. They're all expert flyers, usually favoring rough, windy conditions. In our next group of birds, we have order Pelicaniformes, the pelicans and their allies. These are large aquatic fish-eating birds, and in southern Africa, there are 4 families you're likely to come across: pelicans, cormorants, darters, and gannets. Now, although each of these families is distinctive, there are certain physical characteristics that they have in common, the most important of which is probably their unusual foot structure. Surprisingly, they're the only birds that have all 4 toes connected by webs, and a hind toe that is turned partly forward and webbed to the innermost front toe. There are, however, several other features that they have in common. They all have short legs and long wings, walk poorly, and yet swim and fly strongly. And they also have long beaks and very small nostrils. The gular, or throat pouch, is another fascinating feature they share. This is most highly developed and conspicuous in the pelicans, 2 species of which are found in southern Africa. Most common is the white pelican, a large, predominantly white bird with a bright yellow pouch and yellow feet. And then there's the more rare pink-backed pelican, smaller than the white pelican and more grey-looking with a pinkish bill and pouch. Pelicans are often jokingly referred to as birds whose bills can hold more than their bellies can. But it really is a fact that the pelican's gular pouch can hold 2 to 3 times the capacity of its stomach. Here you can see how the bird uses its pouch as a dip net for catching fish. It always ensures that the fish is facing the right way by juggling it about before swallowing it. Cormorants make up the largest family within order Pelicaniformes and are to be found in coastal waters as well as inland lakes and rivers. They're an ancient group of generally dark feathered birds with long necks and long thin bills. The bare patches about the face and throat are often brightly coloured during the breeding season. Cormorants are great divers and catch the fish they eat by diving underwater, often to great depths. Yet they seldom eat the fish they catch underwater, preferring to swallow it once they've surfaced. Another notable feature of the cormorant is the way it spreads its wings to dry. The reason for this is believed to be that its flight feathers are not as water repellent as those of the other water birds. This characteristic is also shared by the darter, still within the same order as the pelicans and cormorants, yet easily distinguishable from the latter because it has a much longer neck, a more slender head, and an elongated, sharply pointed beak. To see these birds in the water, it's not surprising that they're commonly known as snakebirds. Yet the more persistent name darter has been given to them because of the way they dart their beaks at their prey and then impale it in true spear fisherman fashion. As well as being extremely agile in the water, darters are also powerful flyers. Normally, they only take to the water to feed or else to escape danger. And now, last in this order are the gannets, the Cape gannet representing a family of goose-sized birds. The word gannet is derived from gander, which, as you know, is a male goose. The Cape gannet is a very handsome bird with beautiful and well-defined markings. It lives in vast colonies and commercially is a very important bird because of the valuable guano it deposits. Like other birds within the order, gannets are fish-eating birds, often flying far out to sea to procure their food. From order Pelicaniformes, let's now move on to the wading birds, order Cichoniiformes, in which 4 families are likely to be found in southern Africa. They're the herons and bitterns, the hammerkop, storks, ibises and spoonbills. All are birds that have adapted to living in marshes or shallow waters, though there are a few that have adapted to living successfully in drier regions. They're all long-legged, long-necked, long-billed birds with broad, rounded wings and tails. They also have 4 long spreading toes and live on animal food that is mostly aquatic. Herons and bitterns make up the largest family in the order. Their distinctive features are their completely feathered heads and the way they carry their necks kinked into an S shape, a peculiarity caused by their neck vertebrae being of unequal length. The plumage of herons is also worthy of mention. Apart from some having spectacular breeding plumage like this, herons have patches of unusual down feathers known as powder downs. These fray continuously, creating a powdery substance that's used to dress their other feathers. The colouring of herons is variable, yet many species within the family are white, and they're often referred to as egrets. Often the subject of debate as to where it really belongs, but also classed with order Cichoniiformes, is the strange-looking hammerkop, which comes closest to resembling the heron in voice and foot structure. It gets its name from its long crest, which extends backwards like the nail-pulling end of a hammer. It's widely regarded as a bird of ill omen, and fear of bad luck has prevented people from killing it. Storks, while sharing the long legs, long necks, and long bills of other waders, differ in that they don't have powder downs, nor is the claw of the middle toe serrated. What makes them distinctive is that they have short toes that are partially webbed at the base, and a hind toe elevated above the other 3. Because they lack muscles in the voice box, storks are mute birds, and the only way they can express themselves is by rattling their bills. In southern Africa, the white stork is a welcome summer visitor, often returning from the north to the same place year after year. The marabou stork is relatively rare, and to see it, one really needs to visit game parks in the northern and eastern regions of southern Africa. Ibises and spoonbills, whilst resembling both the stork and the heron in foot structure, are grouped together primarily because their faces are bare of feathers. They're gregarious birds and fly in similar fashion, necks straight out in front and legs trailing behind. Beak shape is the feature that divides the group naturally. The ibis having a long, thin, strongly down-curved bill, which is the ideal shape for probing, whereas the spoonbill, as its name implies, has a broad, flat, spoon-shaped bill, which it sweeps from side to side while sifting small particles of food from the water. Flamingos, which are also waders, but with certain unique features that set them in a group of their own, belong to order Phoenicopteriformes, made up of just one family. They're birds whose necks and legs are longer in proportion to their bodies than those of any other species of bird, and their bill shape and feeding method also make them unique. Notice how the bill is bent in the middle and how the lower mandible is much larger than the upper one. These mandibles are edged with hundreds of tiny filters called lamellae, through which tiny particles of food are sieved from the water. Now, it's not always easy to differentiate between the greater and lesser flamingo, especially when the two species are not seen together. But these are some telling features that might help you. The greater flamingo is predominantly white with red patches on its forewings. It has a large pink bill with a black tip. The lesser flamingo, on the other hand, is normally far redder and has a larger expanse of crimson on its wings. Its bill is also much redder. In fact, from a distance it looks almost black. Flamingos are to be found in both marine and inland waters. Should you come across them, it's quite likely that you'll find a certain species of a totally different order of aquatic birds with them, this being order Anseriformes, which is more commonly known as the order of waterfowl. Making up this group are the many different species of duck, and also geese, such as the spur-winged goose and the Egyptian goose. All waterfowl are swimming birds, with comparatively short legs set back on their bodies, webbed front toes, rather long necks, and broad, flat beaks that are lined with lamellae for filter feeding. Although somewhat clumsy out of the water, so well are they adapted to being in it that they move with unrivaled grace. On the other hand, their playful antics in food gathering gives an indication of the possible origin of the expression ducking and diving. Something that's not commonly known about ducks is that they molt all their flight feathers simultaneously, which means that for 4 to 8 weeks of the year, they're not able to fly. And now we come to an order of birds far removed from water birds. This is order Falconiformes, better known as the birds of prey, which is made up of 4 families. There's a certain majesty and power about raptors that makes them a favorite of many bird lovers. Furthermore, it's fairly easy to distinguish them from other birds because of their distinctive features. For example, they all have a sharply hooked, down-curved bill with a fleshy sear across the top, and nostrils that open through this sear. They also have strong, powerful feet with long claws and an opposable hind toe. These physical adaptations are well suited for tearing flesh and killing animals. Because the secretary bird is so much larger and longer-legged than the other raptors, it's not commonly known that this bird makes up one of the families within order Falconiformes. Yet its beak and foot shape are important clues to its carnivorous diet. The family Accipitridae is a large and perplexing one. and within it we find several subdivisions. One of these is made up of different species of vulture, such as the Cape vulture and the lappet-faced vulture. Sometimes these birds are regarded with revulsion, possibly because of their association with death. Yet they're magnificent creatures with incredible eyesight and a marvelous ability to soar above the veldt for hours. They also perform a vital function of cleaning up the habitat because they feed on dead animals. Also, within family Accipitridae are the eagles, most of which are distinguishable from other raptors because of their fully feathered legs. They also have strong, large-clawed and long-toed feet, which are ideal for grasping and crushing prey. Buzzards, which are sometimes mistaken for eagles, also belong to family Accipitridae. They're frequently seen in mountainous areas, wheeling effortlessly high in the air. Goshawks, sparrowhawks, and kites are other members of this large family. And so are the harriers, distinctive because of their owl-like facial discs. It's because they're given to harrying over fields and marshes that they've been so named. And finally, we come to the last family within the order of raptors, family Falconidae, which is made up of the falcons and kestrels. Features that distinguish these birds from other raptorine families are their comparatively long pointed wings, bare legs and feet, and thighs that are covered with loose feathers. One of the ways of telling the difference between falcons and kestrels is that several of the falcon species have facial markings that look like sideburns. Altogether, there are some 68 species of raptors found in southern Africa. Many so similar that they're often tricky birds to identify. Yet, this is what makes birding a challenge. From birds that are masters of flight, we have in complete contrast an order of birds that prefer terra firma, the ground fowl-like birds of order Galliformes. Certain species of this group were among the first wild birds to be domesticated, partly because of their succulent breast meat and also because some species have spectacular plumage. However, ground birds indigenous to southern Africa don't rank amongst the world's most colourful beauties. Most of them are the earthy colours of the African veldt, the perfect coloration for camouflage and the type of habitat they favour. Francolin, quail, and guinea fowl are found within this order. Now, because they're related to the ground birds in their physical structure, birds of order Gruiformes have been placed next in the order of classification. Apart from this being an ancient order, it is also, within certain families, a threatened order. Southern Africa's wattled crane being one of the species threatened with extinction. Cranes are the largest bird in order Gruiformes and have been placed in a family of their own. They are magnificent, stately birds, to the extent that the blue crane was chosen as South Africa's national bird and is even featured on their 5-cent coin. Perhaps even more regal is the crown crane with its golden crest. And then, as already mentioned, there's the wattled crane, distinctive with its white neck, pendulous wattles, and red facial skin. The family Rallidae is considerably larger. Here we have the moorhen, rail, crake, gallinule, and coot. They're all small to medium-sized birds with very short tails that they flick up and down. They're all ground-dwelling birds and favour marshes, where you'll often see them scuttling about in the reeds or else taking to the water. Bustards and curhans make up yet another family within order Greiformes. They're shy, wary birds and are to be found in open, treeless country where they're great wanderers. They're also strong flyers and have amongst their ranks one species which is believed to be the heaviest flying bird in the world. Bustards are usually the same earthy colours as the felt they roam in. Their mottled brown, buff and black plumage is often attractively barred and spotted. They're mainly vegetarian birds, favouring grain especially, but they also eat a variety of insects, notably locusts. In our next order, order Caradriiformes, we have a diverse collection of birds made up of no less than 12 different families. These can be divided roughly into two groups: the families of shorebirds, known as waders in the one, and skuas, gulls and terns in the other. Now, to describe the reasons why these birds have been grouped in one order is not easy, since it's mainly to do with intricate anatomical similarities and the similar arrangements of secondary flight feathers. All very technical stuff. So let's leave those details to the scientists and rather focus on the families that belong here. First, among the many families in the group of wading birds is family Jacanidae, in which we find the African jacana, unique with its exceedingly long toes and claws that allow it to walk with ease across floating vegetation. Snipes make up another family of waders, as do oyster catchers, which are frequently seen on open beaches and rocky coasts. Plovers are a large and distinctive family, and there are many different species to be found along southern Africa's coastline. They're all plumpish birds with pigeon-like bills, which are shorter than their heads and slightly swollen near the tip. Many are also boldly patterned. Plovers are fairly tame little birds that can often be seen running along the water's edge, picking up small invertebrates that are washed up by the waves. Sandpipers make up an even larger family of wading birds, and one can easily tell the difference between them and the plovers by looking at their bills. Compared with the plover's bill, which you'll recall is pigeon-like and shorter than the head, sandpipers have thin, straight or down-curved bills, which are always at least as long as the head and often much longer. Their colouring is another clue to identification, being absent of any bold markings. And still with the waders are the stilts and avocets, which are characterised by their extremely long legs. Those of the stilts are exceptionally long, making them look as if they really are walking on stilts. They also have slender necks, small heads and very long thin bills. These are straight in the stilt, whereas a striking feature of the avocet is its gently up-curved bill, which it sweeps back and forth in shallow water to procure its food. They're gregarious birds that favour shallow, muddy pools where they can often be seen along the water's edge. Now, as well as the waders that favour coastal waters, there are also the so-called inland waders that are grouped in different families. Dikkops make up one of these families. They're medium to large birds with long yellow legs, cryptically coloured plumage, and bills not unlike those of the plover, though they're longer and stouter. And now from these birds of the land, we turn once more to birds of the sea, these being the second group of birds within order Caradriiformes, in which we find the skuas, gulls and terns. Since gulls and terns are the more common birds, we will focus our attention on them. Both gulls and terns are long-winged, web-footed water birds, most commonly seen along the shore, though they do also venture inland, where large rivers, lakes or marshes attract them. Gulls are probably the most familiar of all seabirds, because they're great scavengers and like to be wherever there's an easy supply of food. In other words, they're happy to be where people are. They eat virtually anything, and for this reason perform a useful service by helping to clean up harbours and beaches of whatever edible garbage there might be lying around. Although animal food and fish is the food of their preference, they're generally not good fishermen, preferring fish that's been stranded by the tide, or shellfish. They're usually raucous birds, are very sociable creatures, and are fine soarers. Often confused with gulls are the terns, mainly because their coloration is similar, although a telling feature of many tern species is the black crown on their heads. Terns, however, are mostly smaller than gulls and altogether more streamlined and graceful. Their wings are also more narrow and pointed. Yet another difference is that terns seldom soar but fly with steady wing beats. They catch their prey either by dipping or plunging just beneath the surface of the water. Order Pterochliformes is made up of just one family, this being the family of Sandgrouse. They're pigeon-like birds in certain respects, for example in head and neck shape. But the most obvious difference between them and pigeons is their coloration. They're all protectively coloured, their dappled, earthy-coloured feathers merging into the rather bleak open countryside, which is the kind of habitat they favour. An interesting snippet about Sandgrouse is that male parents provide their young with water by soaking it up in their belly feathers. Since Sandgrouse are rather similar to pigeons, you may not be surprised that our next group of birds is order Columbiformes, made up of just one family, pigeons and doves. Usually the term pigeon is applied to the larger, plumper birds, whereas dove is more frequently used to describe the smaller, more graceful birds. In southern Africa, we're fortunate to have several species of these lovely birds, some more common than others, but all bearing a close resemblance to each other. They're all plump-looking, stout-bodied birds with short necks, small heads, and short, slender bills that always have a fleshy sear at the base. They're also strong flyers. Their thick, heavy feathers are loosely attached to their skin so that they drop out very easily, probably as a protective mechanism. But perhaps their most interesting features are the way they drink and the way they feed their young. They're amongst the few birds that are able to suck up water without raising their heads the way other birds do. And they feed their young by regurgitating so-called pigeon milk from a large crop. And now the parrot order, order Psittaciformes, sometimes referred to as the Psittacines. They're also a group of birds you can't mistake, although species indigenous to southern Africa are not that frequently seen. Most of us have only seen some of the different species in captivity, as they have long been a favourite of man. Of course, the most distinguishing feature of this order is beak shape, which is strongly down-curved and hooked. Parrots' beaks are also amazingly strong, as is evident from the way these birds can crack open seeds and nuts with ease. Foot shape is another rather unusual characteristic of parrots. Notice how 2 of the 4 toes face forward and 2 behind, an arrangement that helps them to climb and clamber with ease. Placed next to the parrots in order of classification is order Mousebirds, again made up of just one family, the Luries. Like parrots, they have 2 toes in front and 2 behind, but to scientists, An important difference is that their outermost toe is reversible. Luries are found only in Africa, and in southern Africa we have three beautiful species. The Neisner Lurie, which is happiest in a forested habitat. The grey Lurie, which is most commonly seen in wooded savanna. And the purple crested Lurie, which appears in dense woodland and thickets. They're all mainly fruit-eating birds, though they also eat insects and grubs. Favouring similar habitats as the Luries, but with a penchant for insects rather than fruit, are the cuckoos and cuckholds, which are found in the one family that makes up order Cuculiformes. The problem about these birds is that their call may be unmistakable, but they're not that often seen. Those of you who are familiar with the Piet-May-Fro call, but have never seen the bird from which this emanates, may be interested to know that it's the red-chested cuckoo. This is an immature individual which hasn't yet mastered the adult call. All cuckoos are rather slender-bodied birds with long tails and pointed wings. A notable feature of their behavior is that they neither build their own nest nor rear their young, hence the name cuckoo, which comes from the old Anglo-Saxon cuckold, which refers to marital infidelity. Here you can see a young cuckoo being fed by its foster mother, a bird less than half its size that has the unenviable job of trying to satisfy the fledgling's voracious appetite. Cuckolds are not parasitic like the cuckoos, but build their own nests and incubate their own eggs. The colouring of this cuckoo is fairly typical of those species seen in southern Africa. Black head, rufous wings, creamy white or buff underparts, and dark tails. But other distinguishing features of these birds are their heavy-looking legs, their long, rounded tails, rounded wings, and strong, down-curved bills. Order Strigiformes is the order of owls, whose forward-facing eyes are one of their most prominent features and make them almost human in appearance. They're also the reason why owls are the ideal subject for caricature. Compared to other birds, owls have large heads placed on seemingly short necks, and they're able to twist their heads around a full 180 degrees. They're nocturnal birds with incredibly well-developed sight and hearing, and they feed principally on small animals which they catch alive by using their hooked beaks and powerful feet. Owls are divided into two families, the barn owl and the typical owl, though the differences between them are slight. The barn owl group, represented here by the grass owl, can be distinguished by their heart-shaped facial discs, a feature that gives them a monkey-like appearance. They also have longer legs than typical owls. Here again is a typical owl for you to compare these two particular features. Most closely related to owls is our next order, order Caprimulgiformes, in which we find the family of Nightjars. As their name suggests, they are nocturnal birds with a jarring call, and are most active just after dark and at early dawn, when on the wing they feverishly catch their prey, which consists exclusively of insects. To do this, their very wide, gaping mouths are a distinct advantage. Nightjars are extremely well camouflaged birds, their dark, mottled plumage blending with the night, and also making it virtually impossible for them to be seen during the day. The fact that they sit motionless is an added frustration for bird watchers. Swifts, belonging to order Apodiformes, is another group of birds that feed on the wing. Because in flight they're often confused with swallows, people tend to presume that they're related. But this is not the case at all, and there are several important physical differences that separate them. When flying, swifts usually follow a straighter line than swallows, and unlike the fluttering flight of swallows, they beat their wings, often so rapidly that one can barely discern the movement. Their flight silhouette is also distinctive because their pointed wings curve backwards in a neat arc. In contrast to birds that are happiest in flight and that thrive on insects, we next have an order of birds that far prefer to be clambering through foliage and feasting on fruit. This being order Coleoformes, which is made up of mousebirds. Distinguishing features of these birds are their very stiff long tails and their outer toes, which they can reverse and use either forward or backward, a useful feature for climbing and clinging. This characteristic of hanging from branches is unique to mousebirds. As uncommon in certain areas as mousebirds are common is the Narina trogon, which is the only species of order Trogoniformes found in southern Africa. To see this bird, you really need to look in forested areas. But you'll be lucky if the bird doesn't turn its back on you, because this is what it's quite likely to do. Distinguishing features of the trogon are its very thin, tender skin, bright plumage, and its foot shape, which is parrot-like, 2 toes facing forward and 2 behind. From an order of just 1 family, we now move on to an order of 4 families, 2 of which are found in southern Africa. The order in question is order Elcidiniformes, and in it we find kingfishers and bee-eaters. Placed together because of structural similarities, particularly in foot shape, they're generally brightly colored birds, and the eating and nesting habits are also similar. They're predominantly carnivorous birds, and they all nest in cavities, be they hollows in trees or holes in banks. Kingfishers are easily distinguishable by their long, straight-pointed bills, which seem disproportionately large for their bodies. One would presume from their collective name that they're all fish-eaters, yet surprisingly, several species live on insects taken from dry land. There's something eminently fascinating about those that do live on fish. Their success in seizing their prey by plunging straight down into the water, never ceasing to amaze one. Bee-eaters are also not entirely true to their name, in that many species eat mainly wasps. Closely resembling order Elcidiniformes, yet sufficiently different to stand on its own, is order Carassiiformes, which is made up of 6 families, 4 of which are found in southern Africa. These are the rollers, hoopoes, the wood hoopoe, and hornbills. Rollers are most commonly found in a dry savanna habitat where they tend to be solitary birds. Usually with plumage of varying shades of blue, they're magnificent birds. The coloring of the lilac-breasted roller, for example, being awesome. Hoopoes are widely distributed birds, even frequently venturing into gardens and seen probing in lawns for insects. Their peculiar head nodding and their way of erecting the feathers on their heads make them a delight to watch. Wood hoopoes are also fairly well known because they too often visit gardeners. And finally in this order we have the hornbills, conspicuous because of their unusually large horny bills. These bills are actually a lot lighter than they look, and the birds are able to use them most deftly. Perhaps the most fascinating feature of hornbills is that when ready to lay, the female is sealed into the nesting cavity and remains there for the full duration of incubation, and even until the chicks are several weeks old. she is fed by the male through a narrow slit in the walled-up entrance, and this procedure continues for the babies as well. Whereas it's fairly easy to differentiate between the various species of hornbill because of their different coloured beaks, there's one member of this family that's decidedly the odd man out, both in size and in nesting habits. This is the ground hornbill, also known as the turkey buzzard, which is a complete misnomer because it's neither a turkey nor a buzzard. These rather quaint-looking birds generally wander through the veldt in groups, walking on the tips of their toes and snatching up any available prey that's on the ground. As you'll recall, the last order of birds contains only cavity nesters, and so does order Piciformes, in which we find woodpeckers, wrynecks, barbets, and honeyguides. Features uniting these birds in the same order are their yoke-toed feet, 2 toes in front and 2 behind, like the parrots, and a distinctive arrangement of thigh muscles and foot tendons not found in any other bird. They're all tree-dwelling birds and are usually found either alone or in pairs. Though their food varies from one family to another, some preferring fruit and others insects, they all use their beaks to hollow out nest cavities. These range, again depending on the species, from holes in trees to ant heaps or just bare ground. Woodpeckers have rightly earned their name because they use their hard, chisel-shaped beaks to hammer into bark and wood. Their powerful neck muscles enable them to do so with great force, yet their heads are cushioned from the pounding because they have very strong, thick skulls. Another interesting feature about them is that they have long tongues, which enable them to extract insects from the holes they excavate. Barbets, although well equipped for chiseling with their short, strong necks, big heads, and heavy bills, are surprisingly mainly fruit and berry-eating birds and reserve their chiseling capability for nest-making. Their bills are actually not as strong as they look, which is the reason why at breeding time they seek out very soft wood, particularly dead trees or branches. An interesting feature of these colourful birds is the bristles surrounding their beaks. Now we come to the last and largest order of all, order Passeriformes. This is made up of no less than 65 families of birds that have reached the most advanced stage of specialization, having evolved more rapidly and successfully than any other birds. 29 of the 65 families are found in southern Africa. Birds of order Passeriformes are often collectively referred to as passerines, a word derived from passer, which is the Latin for sparrow. Yet, whilst this is apt for certain families, there are some birds within the order, such as the crow, that one could hardly describe as sparrow-like. Perhaps the most basic generalizations about birds of order Passeriformes is that they're all land birds and they're all perching birds. They have 4 unwebbed toes joined at the same level, and they grip by placing 3 toes in front and 1 behind. Within the passerines, the slender-billed species are primarily insect-eating and nectar-eating, whereas the broad-billed species are predominantly seed-eating. Amongst the slender-billed passerines, we find, for example, different species of swallows and martins. Oriole and crow. We find different species of bulbul, thrush, chat, robin, and wagtail. And there are different species of shrike, starling, and oxpecker. There are also the shorebirds, white eyes, and beautiful species of sunbird. Among the conical-billed passerines, there are the different species of weaver and sparrow. And there are the finches, manakins, canaries, and buntings. We trust that this basic introduction to the orders of birds found in southern Africa may serve as a launching pad for anyone embarking on one of the most rewarding of all journeys of discovery. In opening up the world of birds to you, may this program also serve as a reminder that the key to preserving the bird heritage of southern Africa is to preserve the rich variety of habitat that the beautiful and ever-changing landscape encompasses.